673, the biggest paragraph in the page, the last line. V'chein hu gam b'Torah. Everything we just said over the last bunch of lines, which for us means bunch of classes, is true in Torah as well. She'ikir ha'amud the Torah, the idea that Torah is comparable to a column, to a beam, is primarily Einei Galya, the Torah is not Nigla, not the revealed Torah, Ela Pnimis Torah, but the inner Torah. I like to translate the word Pnimis as it should be translated. The face. Pnimis Torah means the face. Pnimis Torah means the face. What do you see on the face of a person? Either nothing or everything. Either nothing or everything. The face of the person either tells you nothing, the face is a mask that covers over, or Chachmas Adam Torah Panav. If you know how to read faces, the face of the person tells you everything about a person. That's exactly how Pnimis of Torah should be understood. The Pnimis of Torah, either you see nothing or you see everything. And the ability to see nothing or to see everything has to do with your sensitivity. So when the Rebbe talks about the Amud and he connects it to Torah, he separates Pnimis of Torah from Nigla Torah. So now, last week was Shavuos. The week before last, all we did was do questions and answers. The entire class, the week we did questions and answers. The sheet took us 3 days to complete it. It took us a while. Maybe it's also going back to the week before last. I don't remember. So you've been Alevi, right?
Yeah.
After class, come up with me. Okay, I want to tell you something.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so what we learned was that the world is being held up by a beam. The beam is Torah mitzvahs. We further learned that this beam is a solid body, but is hollow on the inside. And the interface between the body and the hollow on the inside was explained to mean the ma'isa of a mitzvah versus the kavanah of a mitzvah. And again, every mimer gives you a different angle. Every mimer gives you a different slant. Every mimer gives you a different aspect. But when you learn Tanya and you come across this mashal, the beam is more about mitzvahs than it is about Torah. Mitzvahs are given to us through the Torah, but mitzvahs have a higher source than the Torah itself. That's how it plays out here. So usually the beam would be mitzvahs. In this maimer, the beam could be mitzvahs, but the body of the beam versus the hollow of the beam would be the mitzvah versus the kavanah. Now we're changing from the mitzvah, the kavanah, some mitzvahs to Torah. In other words, and I'm not explaining this because, frankly, I'm not explaining it because I don't know how to explain it, okay? To put all the pieces of Chassidus together, you got to be a Rebbe. I mean, to teach Chassidus, you have to be a Rebbe. We just study what the Rebbe... It's not like Nigle, where you can make stuff up. In Chassidus, you can't make it up. It's either the Rebbe said it, or it's whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. In this Maimer, Kavana is greater than Maisa, which is very, very, what's the word? Different than we're used to. Normally we say the most important thing is the action. Secondary to the action is the Kavana. Right? What does Hashem want? You should meditate on the meaning of tefillin, or you should physically put on the phylacteries, physically put on the blocks. The answer is, tefillin is an exception, because by tefillin the kavanah is a part of the mitzvah. But B'klal, the most important thing is the action, what you do. How you feel is very, very important. But if you did the mitzvah and didn't have kavanah, you're yotzeh, at least according to many people. And if you had all the meditation of the world, you do the mitzvah, you have nothing, because the ikid is the mais. This maimed makes the kavanah higher than the mais. Why? I don't know. Or how, I should say, how? I don't know. How does that fit into what you learn in other places? Like I said to you, every Maimon Chassidus is a piece of a puzzle. Trying to understand each piece of the puzzle is difficult enough. To put each piece of the puzzle in the greater puzzle, this is a much bigger undertaking, and it's way beyond our capability. But this is the fact. In this Maimon that we're currently learning, Kavanah is higher than Maisa. So we start off with mitzvahs. We juxtapose Kavanah against Maisa. We make the Kavanah higher than the Maisa. Okay, all of that's done. And then we flip to Torah. What is the equivalent of the kavana of Torah versus the maisa of Torah? In other words, just like in mitzvahs, there's the body of the pole, the body of the column, and there's the interior hollow of the column. Now, if you remember the conversations we had before Matan Torah, before Shavuos, a beam is a piece of stone or steel that's standing vertically. That's a beam, right? A beam of light is also a beam. A human being standing upright, a person standing this way, is called an oimed. And in Chassidus, they correlate all these three translations of the word. There's a big sugi of Chassidus about Achei Temimim, something standing upright. Because the word amida, as we're using it, is not a physical term, it's a philosophical term. Amida, as we're talking about it, whether it's a beam or it's a person or it's a beam of light, or it's a beam of marble, or it's a human being standing this way rather than laying down, or it's a beam of light. Amud is a philosophical concept. It's the philosophical concept of connecting and keeping apart the heaven and the earth. And the beam has an inner dimension and an outer dimension. The inner dimension is an holy action, and the outer dimension is a holy action, and the inner dimension is a holy kavan, holy intent. We're flipping to Torah. Torah also has a body and a soul. The body of the Torah is nigla, and the soul of Torah is nistes, pnimius. The outside of the Torah, that's the beam itself. The face of the Torah, the inside of the Torah, this is the hollow inside the beam, pnimius ha-Torah. Should I go on a speech, or should I keep reading? What should I do? Should I go into a whole discourse, or should I read the Chavis L'Maimir?
Was a rhetorical question.
It was. No, it was an actual question. I came to class to teach, and I said, okay, let me waste time. That's what I do for a living. I find reasons to not teach.
Listen, you get paid the same no matter how you do the job, so.
That's a good answer, but it's not helpful.
If you're looking for a reason for what you do.
No, I'm trying to ask myself and you what I should do.
Between the two options that you gave, the discourse might be more interesting right now.
It'll always be more interesting. The question is, will it help my purpose of explaining the Maimon to you?
Keep us awake.
Well, the other name, it's a possibility, but it's very subjective. If we read, we have a chance of finishing the Maimon. That's an alternative option. Yes, absolutely. How do I say this in a way that's respectful? Yeah. Imagine being God talking to us.
This guy's suck.
Couldn't have said it better. The beginning of the question is, why is he wasting his time? I mean, the whole idea that the Eibush has a relationship with us, and it's true. It's the foundation of Yiddishkeit, is that the Eibush has a connection to us, And to quote Manis Friedman, who's in a lot of trouble for this, is he needs us in some weird way. Any way you slice it, it comes down to the Eibush that made the world for a purpose. We're central to that purpose. Imagine talking to people. I mean, imagine me, the Eibush talking to us. What would be a corollary of the Eibush talking to us? I mean,
Hold on a second. You're looking at it as the Abishur's talking to his own creations, essentially?
Yes. Well, it's not his own creations. They're a pretty bad model. You know who his own creations are? Adam and Eve. Adam and Chava were the Eibishter's own creations, and they stunk it up.
Yeah. Well, they kept it going for a solid...
A couple hours. Yeah. The 8th mitzvah, that's the first day.
Oh, I
In Gan Eden.
Wait longer.
No, they didn't. They were at Gan Eden before the night, before Shabbos came in. They managed to have 2 children in those couple of hours. Cain and Heva were born in Gan Eden, which is, it took no time to give birth. But wait. We are his creations plus the influence of Adam and Chava and Adam and Chava's children, Adam and Chava's grandchildren. Every single ancestor that you have between today and Adam and Chava added stuff to your complexity, and most of it, it doesn't make us consistent with the phrase that you used, his creations. We're the Eibishter's creations plus all our ancestors' mistakes. Now, we're also our ancestors' virtues, our ancestors' mitzvahs. But if we were God's creations, we would look like Adam and Chava, which is pretty cool. They were not bad. They were okay. They were all right, they quote Chaim Tashkentet. And they also fell. So, appreciate this. The Eibishter is in a relationship with human beings that have been complicated, compromised, diminished by how many generations? How many generations? How many generations? How long is the generation? Let's say a generation is 20 years, huh? If a generation is 20 years, so every 1,000 years there's 50 generations. You're somewhere between 250 and 300 generations. If you want to follow that median, that average, although it's sometimes a lot longer than that. But it's 250 generations. And every generation adds more to us in the way of not seeing things as the Eibishter made them. It's all confused and complicated. And he has a relation with us.
At least that makes it more interesting for him. Imagine if he had to stare at the same thing.
Okay, so the question is fundamentally, is there such a concept as interesting when it comes to God? Yes. And if there is a concept interesting, does this go into that category? I don't know.
God sort of created the system so everyone would argue with him.
Say that again.
God created the system so everyone would argue with him.
Would argue with him.
The moon argued with him, Moshe argued with him, the Jews, the Rabbanim, the Gemara argued with him. He sort of asked for it, so
Yeah, imagine if everybody just agreed with him. You know how boring that would be? He can say whatever he wants and just, let's do that.
No, because there's a story in the Gemara that the last call came out and they said
Okay. I'm putting up my hand and saying enough. We got the picture very loud and clear.
My only argument was going to be why it's not too boring for Hashem is because it's like he's talking to his own creation, which would be the father talking to his son. But it's a very legitimate counter argument, right? If the Eibishter didn't want us, we wouldn't be here. That's how we deal with Rosh Hashanah. We're not afraid of the Eibishter, because if he didn't want us to be, we wouldn't be. And if he wants us to be, and we are who we are, that means he wants us all about chesedus. So then that whole thing about Adam and Chava is completely incorrect then?
No, it's not. It's not. And it's not even because of sin. It's not only because of sin. It's not because of sin. It's because of the complication, the complexity.
Not specifically the Adam and Chava are not what he built, more that the whole thing of him, Adam and Chava were his original generations and passed down, it's changed this and that and whatnot. That I think is incorrect because we're still all his creations. Like he had a part in each of our making. Like we're the way he wants us to be.
Because it's greatness.
Okay, if I open up this door, I spent 2 days on this. I don't want to go there, but it's not that. That's one angle. It's only one angle. That's one angle. The other angle is there is what man is supposed to be, and what man could have been, and it's not that. It's not that. So your point is, well, if it's not that, it's because he wanted it. That's one angle. The other angle is it's a perversion of what he created. Both of those things have to fit on this dish together. Why and how? We're not going there. I don't want to become a philosophy class. I want to stick to our topic. the difficulty, this is so silly to say, but the difficulty in being God and talking to us is, how did he get us to hear what he actually wants us to tell us? How do we not hear what the Eibishter said with such a degree of distortion that what we hear he never said, and what he said we didn't hear? What I'm saying is actually common sense. I mean, even the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is a lakus, but the Rebbe is Fayachal, a bus of Adam. The Rebbe comes to a Fabrengen and he gives instructions and we hear it and we walk out and we do it, and then the Rebbe says, I didn't say that, I said this. I don't understand. I was there, you said. Communication is a very difficult thing because communication is not defined by the one doing the communicating, it's defined by the one doing communicating plus the one who's hearing it. You see what I'm saying? The Eibishter is talking to us. Now, he's giving us his message. We're talking about God, it's such an uncomfortable conversation to have. Hashem is in a relationship with us. Hashem is in communication. The concept is very weird. The concept by itself is a very funny concept. But how does he get us to hear what he wants us to say? Now, the answer to that question is very complicated, but one thing is for sure true. And this is really the point that I'm trying to make. What's true is that what guarantees that at least some of what we heard is what he said is mitzvahs. Yiddishkeit comes down to a series of simple actions. Yiddishkeit comes down to a series of simple actions. That's how the Eibishter made it. There's things that we need to do. If Yiddishkeit were a philosophy, if Yiddishkeit were ideas, if people were told by God a bunch of ideas, that's all, just thoughts, philosophies, and those philosophies we were supposed to translate into a way of life, it would be so distorted, it would be so adulterated, so altered, so changed, it wouldn't reflect his wisdom. If Hashem came to people and said, listen, this is what I want from you, and he gave us some concepts, the way we would doctor those concepts over time would be so extreme that they literally would not only not reflect him, they'd be the opposite of him. But he anchored those concepts in a series of actions that don't change over time. Mizrus is a mizrus. Tefillin is tefillin. A matzah is a matzah. Cheesecake is cheesecake. That guarantees that as much as we could mess up the philosophy, there's an anchor which didn't change. In other words, Torah is a series of ideas. Torah is a series of ideas that come from God and reach us. The greatest security that we should get a little bit of what he really meant is mitzvahs. That's why in Yiddishkeit, mitzvahs are the most important thing. Now, we don't do comparative religion. We're not so open-minded that our brains fell out of our head. You know what I'm saying? We don't say Christianity says, Islam says. They don't exist. They're not in our sphere, not in our world. Right? In the language of the Rambam, there's Das HaEmes, there's a religion of truth. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. But notice that every other religion went away from the emphasis on Maaseh and replaced it with emphasis on ideas. Because it doesn't make sense. Really, a relationship with God has to do with the fact that when I make a loaf of bread, I take off a piece and I say lahafish challah, and I make sure it doesn't become tummy, and I give it to the kohen, and the kohen makes a bracha Asher kedishanu v'kedishasei shel adam v'tzivanu lechel challah. Really? Every religion that stole from Yiddishkeit took away the Maaseh emphasis. You know why? Because it doesn't sound. That's a relationship with God. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the answer is yes. There's a lot of reasons why the answer is yes. But on the simplest level, there are deeper reasons. But the simplest reason is, if you translate the Eibishter, when he gave us his wisdom, said, listen, this wisdom is represented by these actions. An action is an action is an action. Sfardim and Ashkenazim, same matzahs. Chassidim and Misnagdim, same lulav. Same esrig. Same, I don't understand. The Eibishter, the Rambam writes a fascinating thing in the introduction to Pirush HaMishnayos, that Hashem simply showed Moshe how to make tefillin. They didn't figure out tefillin from studying the Pesukim. He showed them what a pair of tefillin looks like. He showed them what a matzah is. He showed them what an esrig is. There's no machlekes amongst Jews what an esrig is. There's none. And you should know one of the greatest miracles of Jewish history, one of the greatest miracles of Jewish history. Because this is one of those things which, even though he showed it to us, comes down to our reasoning, is the fact that all Jews have the same calendar. We don't have a discrepancy about when Rosh Hashanah is.
How about the fact that we all have the same exact Sefer Torah with no differences from past?
Fair enough, but the only reason we have the same Sefer Torah is because the most important thing about the Sefer Torah is the letters. Not what they mean. The words, the doimim, the action. It's what keeps it. And again, I'm not saying that this is the only reason, but there's no doubt that the emphasis on Maaseh, if the smartest guy in the world wanted to teach you his wisdom, and he wanted to guarantee that over time, what he really wants should remain communicated to the people he's teaching, there's only one way. Connected to rituals. The rituals don't change. By connecting to the rituals, a guy can come along in 200 years from today, who happens to be a genius, and says, now what does this ritual mean? He has an opportunity. He never heard the original speech. He wasn't there. By connecting it to a Maaseh, you guarantee that at least some of what Eibishter really wanted us to hear gets to us the way he meant it without us doctoring it. If you give a series of ideas to people, over time, there was a story broken telephone. You heard the story broken telephone, you know. Everyone hears something, they're not sure what they heard, so they correct it, but when they correct it, they make it even worse. And then you make a correction on the correction, and the correction, it goes on indefinitely. The mitzvahs maisius, which is niglasha beniglas, the lowest level of the Torah, anchors us in something that doesn't change. In other words, the Arizal was a big makubal, right? He was one of the greatest makubal who ever lived. I mean, the Arizal was, his mind was not normal. And Eliyahu never came and taught him Torah. It wasn't exactly, the Arizal was given a special act. Eliyahu Navi came down and taught the Arizal Torah. That's what we believe, without a question. Just like the Baal Shem Tov was taught Torah by Achei Temimim, who was Eliyahu Navi's Rebbe. The Arizal learned Torah from Eliyahu for 7 years before he came to Israel, lived in Mitzrayim. It's a long story. But the Arizal was able to create the Kabbalah he created. You know why? Because he was given Tefillin. Tefillin was given 3,000 years before the Arizal. But the boxes were the same, the parshas were the same. So a mind like Arizal can look at the Torah, which is anchored in the never-changing mitzvah. Say, okay, so what did the Eibishter mean? If the Arizal's ancestors were given ideas, by the time it got to him, those ideas were so adulterated, there's no way he can disentangle them and say, so what did the Eibishter really say? Now I want you to understand what I'm trying to bring out. What I'm trying to bring out is, there's a huge advantage in Nigla over Chassidus. There's a huge advantage in Nigla over Chassidus. There's a huge advantage in Nigla over Chassidus. You know why? Because Nigla has really one end. The truth of the matter is it's a lot more complicated than that. But for the purpose of this conversation, Nigla has one end. Tell me what to do. That's what Nigla is. That's what Nigla is. In the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Rebbe Rashab has a series of Memorim and Samachvav that are so special. They're really extraordinary. Where the Rebbe Rashab is explaining to you the process of the emergence of Teresh Baal Peh. Teresh Baal Peh goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu came down with Teresh Baal Peh. But the preponderance of Teresh Baal Peh, the people sitting in a dark cave because they're cold and hungry and afraid, trying to figure out what does Hashem want. It's the Tkufa Ba'isheni, the Tanaim. Because the lights went out. For 1,000 years, the western light burned, the Ner Maravi burned. It was the time of Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh. My father told me, that the Rebbe said in a Fabrengen once, in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, people opened up a Sefer Torah and they passed it from a Sefer Torah like you and I passed it from a Shulchan Aruch. Now I'm asking you, open up a Sefer Torah. It says, how do you make a mezuzah out of those words? To me, you write the Pasha on the wall, no? How do you know it's parchment? How do you know it's so many lines? How do you know what's inside the parchment? How do you know what the tagim are? How do you know which way it's supposed to lay? It's supposed to be like a bolt, it's supposed to be upright, it's supposed to be vertical. How are you supposed to make it? Huh? But in Man Bayis Rishon, they opened up a Sefer Torah and knew what to pass. There's only one answer to that. So first of all, part of what you said is partially, a big part of it is the Mesorah. There is the Halachas L'Moshe Messina.
Also, in the Old Sefer Torah, there's enough rockness there.
They had Ruach HaKodesh. But the Ruach HaKodesh didn't stay Ruach HaKodesh. The Ruach HaKodesh gave them such intelligence, such intellect, that they were able to see in the Teresh B'Ksav, the Teresh B'Peh, is Man Ba'Yisheni, the lights went off. Now, they didn't go off completely. If they want to know what darkness is, let them come visit 2025. Rabbi Akiva should show up today. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, only the Rebbe can handle our generation. If you want to know what darkness is, check out the 21st century. But compared to Beis Rivka, the lights went out. So they started a process, what the Rappel was. What you said before. They took the Sefer Torah, the letters, the 305,200 something letters of the Sefer Torah, plus the halachas l'Moshe Messina that they had. In other words, Moshe, according to the Rambam, Moshe came down from the mountain and he showed, this is a mezuzah, this is tefillin. That's why we don't argue about these things. This is an esrog, this is a lulav, this is a hadlach, this is an arova, and I go on and on and on and on. And they looked for the truth in darkness. In other words, what makes the Tanoim and Ameroyim great was that they didn't have Ruach HaKodesh. You know what they had instead of Ruach HaKodesh? Emunah. They believed with their whole heart that this book needs no editing. This book, the Sefer Torah, this is your point, should not be touched. Don't add a vav, don't take off a vav, don't add a crown, take away a crown. Just the way it was given to me from my father, who got it from his father till Har Sinai. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. The truth of the matter is, there's a wrinkle in that, which is very serious and very important, which is that the Sefer Torah and the whole Tanakh was edited by the Sefer. The Anshe Keshes HaGedolah was 120 men, of whom Shimon HaTzadik was the last. It says in Pirkei Avos, yesterday's Pirkei Avos, right? Shimon HaTzadik haya Mishadek Keshes HaGedolah, who haya Omer. He was last, and he was the first Kohen Gadol, or the second, if you want to count Ezra as a Kohen Gadol, in the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. Those men, the 120 men of Anshe Keshes HaGedolah, before they became Keshes HaGedolah, they were called Seifrim. And the Gemara says, Lama Nikrish Bam Seifrim, which are your Seifrim, it says, 120 men sat down. As the Rambam puts it, Umehem, Kama Nevi'im, amongst those 120 men, there were many people, but it had Nevuah. Nevuah went away slowly. But they knew it was going away, which is why they formulated Teresh B'Peh, and they edited the Tanakh. The Tanakh as we have it. I mean, some people, halachically, you can't be medayik in Oasis of Tanakh. But they edited the Tanakh, meaning the Sefer Torah they had in Man Beis Rishon may have had some differences, and they said this is the correct version. That the Zuges, the Tanoim that came after them, had that Sefer Torah. And they believed with their whole heart that these are the words of God exactly. And they said,
Why did he edit it?
No, it's human nature to edit. You edit because you assume that there's a mistake. Right? Why do people fix? Because something is broken. Now, is it broken or you don't understand?
You don't understand.
But you have to believe that most people, in most cases, if someone gave you a text of a writer and said, what do you think? And said, well, I think this should be written nicer. You're automatically going to edit. Now, sometimes you're editing because the person who wrote it made mistakes. Sometimes you edit because the person who wrote it didn't edit himself. People have inspiration. I recently saw a poem from a boy. Brilliant, but terrible. The ideas were beautiful, but I said to him, you need to edit this. You need to go over this and make it readable. He had this inspiration. He sat down, he wrote a bunch of lines, and then he just gave it out. I said, no, look it over. But he had no patience to do that. So when do you know if it needs editing? And when do you say that you need to study it deeper? When it comes to Torah, you never edit. And the truth is, not only when it comes to Chumash, you don't edit the Gemara, you don't edit Rashi, or the Tosfos, or the Rambam. These are the Shonim Kamalach. The Tanoim and the second Beis HaMikdash were in darkness. They didn't have Ruach HaKodesh. But they had so much respect for the Torah, and so much respect for the Kabbalah, for the Messiah, for the halachas l'Moshe Sinai, that they were moiseh nefesh to say, what does God want us to do based on the facts we have? They were groping in darkness. They didn't have light. They didn't have inspiration. They didn't have godliness. They had nothing. They were in the darkness. But they had emunah. So much emunah that their interpretations of the Torah is God's will. You're listening to me? What makes the Tkufa, the Tanoim, so special is they developed Teresh Baal Peh, binding Teresh Baal Peh, where we have what's written in the Mishnah, and then later on in the Braises, and then in the Gemara, and so forth. But they were the first ones. They were brilliant. To say they were smart is an insult to the words, or insult to them. They were incredibly, incredibly smart. But more than they were smart, they were faithful. They had such trust. They had such belief that what Hashem writes is unchangeable. And now it's on them to figure what God is thinking without touching His words. They were zeichet to be mechaven l'mitasa shel Torah. They knew what the Eibishter was thinking when He wrote these words. But you see, they had a simple focus. What was the simple focus? Anybody home? What is the simple focus? Anybody home? Anybody know the answer to that question?
To make it last.
Huh? What did you say?
To make it last.
What did you say? What do I need to do? By making it into what do I need to do, they make it last. You see what I'm saying? By anchoring it in a maaseh. 2,000 years later, somebody come along and say, okay, I'm in the dark. There's a lot of generations of messing with people's brains and people's souls between me and when the Torah was given. But this God gave. This God gave us the Sefer Torah. This God gave us the mitzvahs as we do them. So you can come along hundreds of generations later and create the Kabbalah, the Ptimis of this, because at least this is unadulterated. It's true. It's anchored in truth. So here's what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is, Hashem is so much smarter than us. It's such a stupid way to put it, but there's no way He can talk to us. There's no way He can talk to us. Now, He can say anything He wants. The problem is not what He says. What's the problem? What we hear. How does the Eibishter secure that He should speak to us, we should hear Him, and we should actually hear what He said over time? The biggest challenge of Judaism is that it's supposed to last from generation to generation. Har Sinai happened a long time ago. Now they tell us, the holy books, we were there, but I don't remember. You remember Har Sinai? Anybody remember Har Sinai? If you do, don't tell nobody. They're not going to believe you. It may be true, but over time, generation after generation after generation, and you know what's interesting about generations? Every generation starts the way you started, knowing nothing. And you grow up, and you learn about Yiddishkeit, and then the world hits you like a ton of bricks with tivus and apokursis and all kinds of distractions, and you got to figure out how to grow up to be a Yid. And not let all those noises distort and convolute and confuse and distract you from this purpose, and to grow up be the next link in a chain to carry along the only things that make sure that it's the way the Eibishter wanted it is the fact that it's connected to action. That's nigla shebenigla. It's mamish, it's the lowest level of nigla. Because it's anchored in a maaseh. Every sofer learned how to be a sofer from a practical sofer. He didn't read it in the book. Every matzah bakery learned how to bake matzah bakery from an existing matzah bakery. They didn't read about it in the book. Every Yiddish mame who sits on Friday morning and she makes challah and she separates challah does it because her mother showed her how to do it. And the same is true in every aspect of Yiddishkeit. That's the anchor. The anchor is not the books. The anchor is the Ma'aseh V'Poel. You see what I'm saying? I need your attention. But here's the real story. What makes Yiddishkeit true throughout history is the fact that it has a nigla, is the fact that it's connected to halacha l'maaseh. But the ideas that come before are higher. Meaning, the only reason you and I are still practicing the Torah that the Eibishter gave at Har Sinai is because of mitzvahs, and because of Rashi Yeshivas, because of Torah Shebaal Peh, because of halacha l'maaseh. Not because of spiritualists. You ever heard of the Stukim and the Prushim? You know the story by Yesheni? I had an uncle who's now passed away. He was an ancient historian. And he said to me, during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, there were several hundred different types of Jews. Several hundred different sects, cults, who all did mitzvahs their own way. We know about the Stukim and the Prushim because they were the biggest groups. You know about the Dead Sea Scrolls? You know what you've heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls? They're written sometime in Zman Bai Yesheni. They didn't belong to the Stukim. It was some other sect. There were so many different groups who all decided how to interpret the Torah. You know what survived? The ones that were called the bad ones. We were considered the bad ones. The Perushim. The Pharisees. Yech. That's us. What was the big fight between the Stukim and the Prushim? You listening or not listening? The big fight between the Stukim and the Prushim is the most important thing in Judaism what you do, or is the most important thing in Judaism your relationship with Hashem? And who do you think said what? The Prushim, we said the most important thing is what you do. And the Stukim said the most important thing is your relationship with the Eibishter. And they were wrong and we were right. You know why? Because our focus was on, tell me what to do. Because what to do, God said. And what it means, that's you. If you're a Navi, God is speaking to you. If you're not a Navi, if you're a spirit that's not a Navi, maybe you're going in a new direction, a new Shita, it's not Torah, and if it's not Torah, it's Sheker. What's the measure of spirituality vis-a-vis truth? Not vis-a-vis intelligence, vis-a-vis truth, vis-a-vis God. There is no. A mitzvah is. You understand what I'm trying to describe to you? Hello, anybody home? I'm talking to a bunch of blank stares. But, here's the but. If you could figure out true spirituality, if you could figure out, in quote, a relationship with the Eibishter, it is higher. In other words, what's better? Kabbalah or halacha? What's better, Kabbalah or halacha? Of course halacha is better. Halacha is more important. You know why halacha is more important? Because halacha doesn't lie. Halacha is truth. Kabbalah may be truth. I don't know if it is or it isn't. But if Kabbalah would be true, if you know for sure it's true, then it's a higher. Young man, could you leave the room, please? I was wondering why he's not paying attention to me. I was wondering why he's not listening to me. I need you to leave the room now.
Sorry.
You're not sorry. I just caught you. I should have started 15 minutes ago. He would have gotten 15 more minutes of the shir. Hashem's wisdom comes from a higher level to a lower level. What makes Hashem's wisdom true is mitzvahs. What makes Hashem's wisdom true is nigla. In fact, we know what the story about Yisheni is. We know what the story of Achei Temimim is. They saw the lights going out. They saw Ruach HaKodesh going away. That's why we fast Time Gedalia. Why do we fast Time Gedalia? Because Gedalia was murdered. He wasn't the only Navi murdered. Yeshaya Navi was murdered. Zechariah Navi was murdered. We don't have a fast day for them. Why are we fasting for Gedalia? Because when Gedalia died, the Jews left Israel. And when the Jews left Israel, the Ruach HaKodesh left Israel. It was after the Churban. And when they came back in the second Beis Rivka, they didn't come back. When they came back and by Yeshaya, the old people were crying and the young people were dancing. Because the old people knew what the Beis Mikdash is supposed to look like. And the young people had no clue, they never saw it. There was no Ruach HaKodesh. So the Achei Temimim saw this. They saw that the divine light, the focus on a relationship with the Eibishter was not going to work. So, okay, we're becoming misnagdim. That's really the way to put it. And I don't like the word misnagdim. We're becoming oilam mishnah. We're becoming, the whole Torah becomes the Gemara. What about spirituality? Spirituality is higher than Gemara. But if you're not a real Navi, it's so dangerous. How do you know you're not going off to go to wherever you want in your own fantasies, your own taivas, your own weaknesses, your own biases? It's impossible to know. So the anchor of Torah is nigla, no question about it. If a person is a makubal and doesn't value mitzvahs, doesn't value Torah, it's not Kabbalah. It's whatever you want. Anybody can say anything they want. What makes it true? What makes it true is Torah. What makes it Torah is that it's anchored in what we have as a concrete, unchanging fact. And to quote you, it's the letters of the Sefer Torah which haven't changed over 3,000 years. And the mitzvahs that haven't changed over 3,000 years. So I'm saying two things. Pnimius HaTorah is much higher than Nigla the Torah. There's no question about it. But it's much harder for Pnimius HaTorah to be true. So for Pnimius HaTorah to be true, it has to be anchored in Nigla. That's why Kabbalah is so selective, you know. Our Rabbeim, when it comes to Nigla, they quote every place. Anybody has anything to say in Halacha, they quote. Comes to Kabbalah, We had here years ago a Jew Fabrengen in Yeshiva. His name was Rabbi Aaron Chitrik. He worked on the Rebbe's Sforim. My father-in-law, who had a great memory, said to me, Aaron Chitrik is an incredible zakat. He worked on Sforim. He worked in the Rebbe's library, Bekitzer. So he came to Fabrengen Yeshiva, and we asked him, is there anything unique about the Rebbe's library? So he said, yes. Until recently, and he explained to me what happened recently, that this changed. The largest collection of Sforim and Kabbalah any place in the world was in the Rebbe's library. The Rebbe's library has over 15,000 Sforim of Kabbalah. 15,000 Sforim of Kabbalah. How many of those Sforim are quoted in Chassidus? 20? 25? 30? And he says to us, it's not only that Chassidus quotes so few Sforim, the same quotes over and over again. There are so few Mukubalim that we just read their books. Obviously the Zohar, obviously the Arizal, obviously the Ramak, and there's a Mukubal whose name is the Ramaz, Ramesh Zakuta, who wrote Pirush on Zohar, which is quoted by the Rebbeim. But not only are there a very small selection of Sforim that they are quoted, it's the same quotes over and over and over again. Why do you think that is? Kabbalah is higher than Nigla. But how do you know it's true? It's much harder to know it's true because it's floating. The best way to hold Kabbalah is Nigla, is the psukim, the words, is the mitzvahs. So now, I just gave you a class to make, it's a long way to make a short point. The point is, Pnimius HaTorah is higher than Nigla the Torah. But for Pnimius HaTorah to be Torah, to be true, is far more different than Nigla, because Nigla's priority is all about what did God say I should do. And by connecting it to an action, you anchor it in a truth. Anchor it in which doesn't change over time. Mitzvahs don't change over time. Halacha doesn't change over time. It's enhanced. We have new shilas, but we don't go back and re-question Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. We don't do that. You see what I'm saying? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a master of Pnimius HaTorah. To put it in plain words, for Kabbalah to be true, Kabbalah is higher than Nigla, no question about it. But for Kabbalah to be true, it's much more difficult than Nigla. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had it right. And if you have it right, it's higher. I started this class with a question, what's higher, Nigla or Chassidus? Right? Pnimius or Nigla, right? That was how I started the class. Remember? A long time ago, it was a half an hour ago, I asked you this. I started this discourse with the question, what's higher, Nigla or Chassidus? And the answer that I'm giving is, Nigla is higher, not because it's higher. Nigla is higher because in the darkness, it's far more likely to be true. Because you're focusing on what do I have to do. It's an anchor. Nisted is higher, but it's much more precarious, it's much more dangerous, it's much more vulnerable. It's much more, you can do whatever you want. And Torah has to be emes. And for Pnimius HaTorah to be emes, you got to be Rashbi, you got to be Dariz, you got to be the Baal Shem Tov, you got to be the Alter Rebbe. But if Pnimius is like emes, Pnimius is higher than Chitzonius. So realistically speaking, the reason Jews exist is because of the Gemara. Don't kid yourself. It's because of halachas, of mitzvahs ma'asiyos. Now we're Chassidim, and we're into Pnimius HaTorah. Chassidus says what I just said. With such, you read those handful of money from the Rebbe Rashab in this time of year, that between Pesach and Shavuos, Tafresh Tamach Zayin, where the Rebbe Rashab explains Torah, that's all he says. The whole credibility of Pnimius HaTorah is the credibility of halacha. And Allah is Nigla the Torah that people learned in darkness. They were tapping in the darkness. And they had one interest. I believe that this came from God. I want to know what God is thinking. And I don't want to add my own insight into this. I want to say it just the way God wanted it. So they were so loyal to trying to figure out what to do that there's emes in their Torah. Pnimius is higher. But Pnimius is much more vulnerable. Rabbi Shimon was one of those chavreh. Rabbi Shimon was a Talmud Rabbi Akiva. They were in the process of developing Tesh Bal Peh. They were all Rosh Yeshivas. They were all Go'onim. They were all Nigla people. Rabbi Shimon was also a Nisted person. His Nisted is higher than the Nigla that they were learning. But it's because Rabbi Shimon had so much integrity that his Kabbalah is also the Eibishter's Ratzon. And that's what this line means, yeah? V'cheinu gam b'toira. She'ikar ha'amud de Torah ein negalya de Torah, la pnimis ha-Torah. The most important thing in Torah is pnimius. If you're Rab Shimon. Otherwise, don't go there, because you're going to mess it up. So now I have one more question for you, Rabbi Bogomolsky. Okay, I asked you a question, we got an answer, now it goes to the second question. Should I write a list of questions and repeat this all tomorrow, or should we move on to the next paragraph? You run the risk of me actually listening to you, so think long and hard.
I'm concerned about that, hence why I'm taking a few seconds to think about my answer. But
Wow.
I think the best way to
That's
do
very
this
un-American. It's very un-American.
I know, to think about my answer, crazy, really. I could be wrong, but I think that it's actually at least half the room was paying attention to that whole discourse for the most part.
I'm not saying they weren't paying attention. I just looked at blank stares. Maybe you listened with such blank faces.
By the way, I was listening with a blank face because I was trying to figure out something to say to make it look like I'm listening. There was nothing.
So then you weren't listening.
No, I was listening, except if I said anything to be like,
Controversial.
it would have just sounded dumb.
No, it would have disrupted my train of thought.
And that.
So should I write a list of questions or not?
I think we understand it.
Somewhat.
Yeah.
If you write a list of questions, you're writing on what we just did today?
Yes. And then we spend the next 4 days reading that list, and next week we read the next paragraph.
If you get a copy.
If I get the copies, the right thing to do is to write the list of questions. But I'm not.
The right thing to do would be the right
To review it again. Everything we learn twice. That's what the questions are about. I'm not writing questions. I'm not. We're going to continue. Now, chances are, I don't know about tomorrow morning, but Tuesday morning, if there's a trip tomorrow, which is a big if, I doubt there'll be a Chassidus Tuesday morning.